Hello and welcome back to Identity Architects, the podcast that spotlights individuals changing the way their data is used to deliver more engaging data-driven experiences. I'm your host Ben Cicchetti, and for this episode our VP of Sales UK, Nick Henthorn, sat down with Mark Evans, Managing Director for Marketing and Digital at Direct Line, to discuss identity, data privacy, consumer trust, and much, much more. Before I hand it over to Nick and Mark, just a reminder to hit that subscribe button so you know when the next episode of Identity Architects lands. But without any further delay, here's Nick and Mark.
So Mark, thanks so much for joining us today. For anyone who doesn't know you, could you give us a quick introduction to Mark Evans and your 10 years at Direct Line?
Pleasure to be with you today, Nick. Yes, who am I? Well, I'm, I suppose, defined by being Managing Director of Direct Line Group, looking after marketing and digital. I've been there for 10 years, quite a stint. My longest job and longest I've been at any one place as well. But I am in the process of moving on, which we might come back to. But I broadly have looked after marketing and digital in an organisation that's been through a lot of transformation in the last 10 years and had a lot of fun in marketing, but also beyond. So the role has stretched beyond that. And I currently sit on the exec and also on the board of our legal services business. But as I said, I'll tease for now and just say that I'm moving on. We can come back to that.
We're looking forward to getting a well-earned break by the sounds of it. Well, thank you for that. I'm going to start by diving into a few sort of quick fire questions, if that's okay, before we go into some core content. Starting with, what's your earliest memory of either advertising or marketing?
Well, I had to think about this one because I tried to go back as far as possible. And it was actually some of those classic adverts. So if you remember Milk Tray and you remember Hamlet, but it was actually, I think it was Heineken or Carlsberg, that the water in Majorca don't taste like what it ought to. And it was that, I don't know, was that Carlsberg or Heineken? I can't remember, but I remember that line massively. It was the posh lady who then sipped the alcohol. Can't even remember what the brand was.
I'm going to place a bet on Carling for that one. But,
Carling Black Label. Yeah, that was it. Yeah, Carling.
also
And they were
remember
into
that very
Sonic
well.
as well back then. You know, I mean, those were maybe the halcyon days of core TV advertising. And of course, the more things change, the more they stay the same. TV advertising is still important, has been for us at Direct Line. But yes, it's a very sort of old-fashioned ad concept.
Fantastic. And what was your first job in the sector?
In Greece, living in Athens for Mars as a graduate trainee, working on Mars and Maltesers, I properly was the cat that got the cream and had a fantastic time for about a year over there. And then left the day before the massive earthquake, which was epicentered really almost on top of where their Mars office was in North Athens.
Wow.
Mm.
Well, predicting earthquakes apart, if you look back to then, based on what you know now, what would you say to yourself?
I wouldn't say anything different other than I would have listened a little bit harder and earlier to a profound message I got on the night of my graduation, which was to seek to achieve success and significance simultaneously. And I've always been quite an achievement-oriented person, and that softened over time. And so probably the nub of it would be to enjoy it a bit more, actually. Enjoy it in the moment a little bit more.
It's fascinating. That's a hard thing to do when you're at that sort of stage in your career, isn't it? And really trying to, well, as you say, hit goals.
Tough balance, yeah. I'm always reminded of meeting Johnny Wilkinson and him saying that when he won the Rugby World Cup, that he kind of felt nothing. He felt quite hollow and cheated and celebrated for a nanosecond and then wondered what the hell he was going to do the rest of his life. And then I think subsequently learned how to be present and enjoy it in the moment. But for all his success and achievements, he just never really learned how to properly enjoy it.
Tell you what, you're taking a step back down memory lane here. We've got Carling adverts, and we've got the most important drop kick we'll ever see in history. Love it.
On his wrong foot, indeed.
What do you love about what you do right now, and specifically what you do within the industry you're in?
Well, I fell into the industry kind of as a happy accident, and I'm forever grateful that is the way it worked, because the innate energy and possibility and passion and pride, I may be biased, but I just don't think that exists in the HR industry or the finance industry. Now, I guess I don't know what I don't know, but that's my bias and my assumption. And I just think there's an energy and a buzz. It's quite thrilling, quite fizzing, and it's not compulsory to be a masochist, but it probably helps because sometimes it's the school of hard knocks. But out of that, the achievements are really meaningful.
Fantastic. So obviously this is the Identity Architects podcast, and within advertising, well, certainly we're obsessed with this concept of identity, specifically the ability to identify individuals across devices, platforms, etc., etc. How would you take that concept of identity and explain it to a 10-year-old?
Well, there's a bit that goes before, which is that consumers are beautifully irrational, so they want things personalised, but they don't want them to be creepy and all that. So, but for a 10-year-old, the best metaphor I could come up with: imagine you're at a party and somebody has face blindness. I think a 10-year-old could get that. They don't remember names and faces, and they keep coming up to you and introducing themselves to you over and over again. You just get really, really annoying. So the benefit of remembering somebody's identity is that there's a continuity, a familiarity, kind of a bit of a trust. You know what to expect. But through the eyes of a 10-year-old, wouldn't it be annoying if somebody just kept coming up again and again and kind of cold hitting you, trying to make a conversation?
That's a great way of explaining how to sort of persistently identify. I love that. Um, Thank you. I'm going to join these next two together. What keeps you awake at night, and what then motivates you to get up in the morning?
Genuinely, there's nothing that keeps me awake at night, much to my wife's annoyance. So she's a nurse, so she did really the hard end of having kids, as in the night stuff. Because sadly, I was traveling and working pretty hard during those early days. And so I've never really sort of come across that whole thing of, the elastic snaps and you're never as good a sleeper again. I am the best sleeper I know in the world. I've not had asked that many people, but so nothing keeps me awake at night. Maybe I'm just fortunate there, but maybe it links to what keeps me motivated in the morning, which is actually I use the Wim Hof method, which some people may be familiar with. So that includes the breathing and the 10 minutes in ice water every morning that I'm around, and that's part of my how do I stay balanced, um, relaxed, non-anxious, on top of myself, which I think then feeds into perhaps being a better sleeper. But yeah, I do the hardcore ice plunge thing every morning, and that's really, what starts my day.
That's really impressive. Is that what? And have you got something special at home for that, or do you just do the ice shower, or do you
You
fill
know,
up?
I hate cold showers because you get cold again and again and again, and it's really not very zen. But I did invest in the early days of lockdown in an ice tub. I mean, it's nothing fancy, but it sits in the back garden with a lid on, bit of chlorine every now and again, and so plunge there, sort of neck deep, for 10 minutes. And honestly, you don't feel cold because we grew up as a species, or we evolved as a species in hostile, cold, dangerous environments. And the Wim Hof thing is all about getting uncomfortable with being uncomfortable, which is all we've ever had until we started watching Netflix on the sofa, eating Nando's, and then got a bit sort of out of shape as a species. Bizarrely, it really is invigorating and enlivening and sets me up well for the day. And I would encourage everybody and anybody to do that to start the day.
You're a braver man than me. I think I'll stick to a warm shower for now. You never know. I might change my mind at some point, but yeah, very good. Um, Last of the quick fires for you. If there was a song that was a soundtrack to your life, what would it be?
It would be Baz Luhrmann's, the only song he's ever written. It's called Sunscreen, which I think came out in 1997, 98. You'll have to look it up, but he basically narrates a life message and all sorts of profound things, which we've played to our kids many times over, including messages like don't be jealous. Sometimes you're behind, sometimes you're ahead. The race is long, but in the end, it's only with yourself. So it's just packed full of profound stuff. And that would be a song that I would love to say has been my mantra. Obviously veered from the path occasionally, but it's a good one if people want to look it up.
you may also notice I've been scribbling something down. It's to go and listen to that very song.
It's pretty good.
Massively rate Baz in terms of production of films. Didn't know he'd written a song either. So
Only one. I
amazing.
think it was a one only, and probably it was written for him. But he narrates it personally, and I think he narrates it. Does he narrate it personally? I don't know, but it's his one hit. It's a good one.
Fantastic. Well, thank you for that. I think we'll move now on to a bit more of the topic of the day, which is obviously identity. I'm going to start with I suppose, a bit of the issue that's been growing and growing, and becoming more. Everyone's become more and more aware of the third-party cookie. It's now almost extinct. And I say almost because Google have announced once more that they're going to extend the deadline.
Yeah.
But what's your thoughts on the status quo of all that in the industry right now?
Well, the first thing I would say is I'm not a technologist, so this won't be a technological answer. I think everything is still very fluid. Google's motives. Well, let's not talk about Google's motives, but ultimately, it's still a bit of a moving feast. I mean, I think new solutions will emerge. Identity solutions are already, my inbox is already peppered with post-cookie providers, and there's no doubt that there are contextual solutions which will do some of the job. My main feeling about this, something really caught my ear the other day, which was that Unilever have now got 1 billion first-party records. I thought, I mean, people can't see this, but I'm looking at your face, Nick, and that was my reaction as well. I was like, is that really true?
I didn't want to just jump in, but my face was actually working on fast maths, and it's not particularly fast. But I'll just go with 1/8 of the world's population.
What's the quality? What's the permissions? What's the usability? But of course, this whole thing about first party data and to fuel D2C, I think that's a really interesting dynamic. And is it just an arms race? So I was with L'Oreal the other day, and they were saying it's actually really hard and expensive to get there. And I'm thinking, yeah, I don't disagree, but is it actually mission critical for everybody? Because if it is an arms race for first party data and the utilization of that, then you just can't ignore that. And it makes me think that sort of some of the important dynamics around this conversation are actually in the boardroom. Is consent a boardroom conversation? Is the addressable universe and all the various impacts, ups and down on that, well understood across the organization and optimized? So I just think that the stakes are raising, and I'm really curious, well, whether the Unilever stat is true or not. It signals the direction of travel, maybe.
A couple of really interesting themes there. One, the importance of first-party data to organisations who are arguably detached from the customer. So, pick on the Unilever as an example, where there is an ever-growing base of organisations who are giving second-party data to the market. So, the retailers of the world. But also, I love your comment on the boardroom there, and clearly, consent and how you can communicate to your customers should be treated as something exceptionally important. So thank you for that. I think it's really, really interesting. Moving it away from the boardroom and back to the CMO, first-party data is integral to marketing strategies. When you've got that direct relationship with your customer, and of course, Direct Line's a great example of an organisation that has that first-party relationship. What would you recommend to every brand or advertiser, really sort of from now onwards, to prepare for a future where the cookies disappeared?
Well, the short answer would obviously be, treat it like gold, and because it's easy to score own goals and lose access or lose the interoperability of different data sources and so on. So I think it is that cherishing it, and it links to the point about it being a board level conversation. The whole organisation. I mean, often, I guess people don't realise how important it is, or how it can be damaged. So it's setting clear for us. It would be clear KPIs. It's a measurable thing that we can put a value on, and that means that we think very hard about entity structures across a multi-business model, multi-brand model to make sure that it's available to all, particularly in a world where everything's going to be more networked, and more systems based. And the future of insurance has happened in China already. and it is that whole network effect. And as we seek to emulate that, it really is just making sure that everyone understands the value of data. And for us, we do get a lot from people quoting to us, which is really great data, but it's not universally used across the organization yet, because we haven't completed the single customer view. So I think this is a bit 101. I don't have any silver bullets, but getting as much data with as much high quality, with as much access, as much interoperability, perhaps even weren't CMO objectives 5 years ago. They absolutely need to be known.
Really interesting. So start with the basics then. Start with the foundational layer within your organization where you
Yeah,
can.
absolutely. I mean, the eco stuff, network stuff I talk about is fairly fancy pants. But even before that, there's lots of stuff. Just having, it's almost like, do you have a live blue peterometer of how many addressable first-party contacts you've got, and what are the constraints around them? I mean, let's not forget GDPR and ICO, and there is a sort of a regulatory need to be on top all over this. But I think it's just much more of an offensive, as opposed to defensive mindset. And it's a core part of capability build. Hence, the ... for Direct Line is that we called out data literacy as one of our core competency builds. It's not like people were illiterate, but there's always another gear, and that links to really the utilization of our data.
And that's across the board within the organization, is it?
Yeah, well, for us, it's slightly different in that we moved to the Spotify Agile model, essentially. And so we have a data chapter. And so all our very clever data scientists are federated across cross-functional squads. And so that's part of the upskilling. But within the data chapter, we have a data academy, which is first and foremost to upskill those data scientists. But at the sort of the basic intermediate levels of that competency build, absolutely, it's for everybody in the organization. So all the materials are open source within internally. And we're trying to put as many through. I say we, we'll come on to, do I say we or they? I don't know. I'm sort of somewhere in between. But the organization really trying to get as many people through a level 3 apprenticeship in data science as a signature for what we think is going to be important.
Fantastic. Proper investment into the data future of the business. Love that. You've touched on this already a little bit, the consumer. So without consumers, there's no business at the end of the day. And that very much includes data privacy. And we've talked about the shift away from third-party cookies already. But in a world, and indeed you've also mentioned GDPR there, what are some of the challenges you see in the industry as a result of the increase in regulation in the market?
Well, it comes back to something I said at the beginning, that it's a very delicate balance between privacy and personalization. As I said, that beautiful irrationality of consumers, why should they have to realize or care that there's a trade-off or a fine line on the organization side between knowing me to the point that you can be more relevant versus there's things I believe you shouldn't know about me. But of course, the two sides of the same coin. So I just think there's some delicate balances, and there's a bit of instinct about where an organization should tread that fine line to strike the right balance. And one of the challenges, therefore, of the CMO and marketing is to help the rest of the organization to understand some of these things. And it's a bit like educating the organization on marketing per se, which is often seen as a coloring in function. And I can think of a few key examples that bring that to life for me, where we've got people in the commercial side of the business who are literally tearing their hair out because something that seems so obvious and binary to them is actually much, much more grey and needs to be treated with a bit more subtlety. So the role of marketing then becomes educator, evangelist, to some extent enforcer, and actually a bit less about the technical side of managing it, but more managing the stakeholders and the influences around the data itself, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So effectively, becoming that supporting that balancing act between privacy and performance
Yeah,
from the
exactly.
marketing
Very
function.
well put. Sorry, that's very well put. And so specifically in the role that I've been in for the last 10 years, I'm the responsible person, the approved person, the regulated person, and in theory, I'm the one that goes to jail if we get this stuff wrong. And so that provides good caution, but also at the same time, everything I talked about at the beginning, the optimism, the energy, the passion, that is the juggle that goes on inside my head, and I'm sure many others' heads in real time. You want to go for things, you want to achieve, you want your organization to be successful, but equally, you don't really want to do a stint in choky.
So well, you're raising a really interesting point towards the next question there, because that's very much the company view of the risk associated with getting that balancing correct. But if you flip that onto the consumer, from your point of view, why is it so important for companies to put the consumer first and include them in their wishes and business decisions? So you've got the business view, which is
Yeah.
control, regulation. Flip it back to the consumer. What is it about the relationship with the consumer that's so important?
Well, this is a deep one, or this is existential, and for me, I spent 10 years at Mars, where there were 5 principles that guided everything, and the very first words, which are sort of ingrained on the inside of your eyelids if you spend a bit of time at Mars, it said the consumer is our boss, and that was really heartfelt,
Love that.
and that permeated everything. So it seems to me so inherent that is fundamentally true for a sustainable business, in all senses of the word sustainable. And as consumers change and evolve, as they surely do and will, it's the role of the marketing folks in the organization to bring the outside in and bring the future forward, and help an organization understand how it can meet customer needs better than their competitors. And I'd maybe draw on, in financial services, one example would be PPI, which was very profitable, very complex, and very misunderstood by customers. And obviously, in the end, was not sustainable, caused huge write-offs, huge breakdown in trust. And what an absolute mess. What the antithesis of sustainable business. And it was founded on a complete miscomprehension of what consumers really want, or what they understood. And I'm sure there's many others, but it's just so intrinsic that marketing is not the communication function; it's the consumer representative. Which is why I say that it's a good CMO has their hands on the customer data, because that's really the identity of their customer base, but also has their hands on customer experience, because that's how the brand manifests beyond communication. If you're going to truly represent consumers and customers into the business, then not in a sharp elbowed way, but in a sort of holistic and integrated way, you've got to have your paws into all of these dynamics.
So that's really interesting. You've touched on trust there, which is clearly a big part of every organisation, or it should be. What do you think needs to change in industry, and how can businesses come together to redefine relationships with each other?
Great question. No shortcuts. I love Rachel Botsman's definition of trust. So Rachel Botsman, I do a podcast and interview her, and she's, I think, one of the greatest global gurus on trust. And her definition is that trust is a comfortable relationship with the unknown, i.e., transparency is actually the enemy. If you need transparency, you don't really trust somebody. It's thinking you know what somebody's going to do when you can't see what they're doing. And the good news and the bad news there is that takes time, because it's based upon evidence of what has transpired when you weren't able to know what that company was doing for you or not doing for you. So the dot 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 is, it talks to consistency, repeatability, uh, and getting to the right outcomes over time, as opposed to any sense of asking for trust or assuming that trust will be given freely, because that comfortable relationship can only come from evidence.
Very much like a one-to-one human relationship, then.
Yeah, and it's true
Yeah.
of friendships and marriages and so on, is that trust is easily broken, and because then all of a sudden I'm no longer confident when I can't see, and therefore I may seek more transparency. And that's almost the worst thing, isn't it? It's so evident, really, when somebody says I need to know more, they're actually saying I don't trust you. I think Rachel's really nailed that particular dynamic.
Absolutely agree. Absolutely. Yeah. Really good. Finally, for this section, what do the consumers need to do in order to be best equipped for companies collecting their data? And what tools can the industry offer them?
Well, I think it's tough. The consumers don't really know what they don't know. I think the onus fairly and squarely falls on organisations to, again, there's a balance here, to give control but not be too complex. And actually, that's not easy because obviously the more control you provide, the more complex it is for the customer to manage something, particularly across multiple platforms, multiple companies. How much time, energy, and effort and care do they really have to give to this? And so I think clearly the answer is to empower customers to have the right level of control with minimum complexity. So it actually comes down to really nuts and bolts stuff like simplicity of wording
Yeah.
and the user experience, and not so it's not fancy pants stuff. It's really in the detail to empower customers. And we did some work with plain numbers where the level of numerical literacy in the country is absolutely shocking. And plain numbers do a survey, 6 questions, basically quite basic percentage type questions. And I think something like 16%, with unlimited time, 16% of people got these fairly basic percentage-based questions right. It was things like, if something was £2 and it goes up in price 20%, what's the price? Unlimited time. And then I think only about 25% got even 5 out of 6 right. So we have to understand that the average reading age is 13. The average numeracy is really poor. And so if you're really going to empower customers, it's got to be really, really basic. And interestingly, the terms and conditions for insurance are scored as postgraduate level literacy.
Right.
Keep it simple.
Yeah, I mean there's a disparity right there, isn't there? At the end of the day, and I love that theme. Um, actually, it probably flows back into trust again and the experience a consumer has with you. If they can transparently understand what you're going to do with them in a nice, simple, and easy to understand way, you're going to engender more trust with the customer.
Yeah, absolutely. And then when that's borne out, you can imagine that they might feel more on side for more. And so, if an inside out perspective is, I really want to cross sell, I've got some KPIs, how can I wham wham bam, thank you, ma'am. But clearly that runs counter to all sensible logic about what consumers are really thinking about their relationship and what they're getting out of it. It goes back to the consumer orientation right from the start, just really understanding what consumers want and need, not least with regards to consent and privacy.
It's this. It goes back to that balancing act again, doesn't it? It's I'm a motor insurance customer of yours. You want to know my home insurance renewal date. Actually, that's a benefit for you and a benefit for me if it's sold correctly, because at the end of the day, that's going to mean a better policy price, for example. So it's taking things and putting them back into those simple terms for a consumer to understand the value, maybe.
Yeah, absolutely. And we do get a normal distribution of quality of home renewal dates from motor customers for all the reasons you can imagine. And of course, insurance is the epitome of a trust business in that you hope you never need to use it. You have no idea how they're going to show up when you really need the service because something's gone badly wrong. And so actually every single interaction is in the consumer's mind or subconscious a proxy for how they'll be when the time comes. And so that comfortable relationship with the unknown is built up through every single little journey, every single little interaction, which is why user experience is so important, because then maybe that's the best proxy for how capable they'll be come the time.
Yeah, if it's incomprehensible, difficult to understand, etc. at the front end, then how's that going to look when something bad happens? Yeah, absolutely. Talking of insurance and talking specifically of Direct Line, you're going to be leaving at the end of this year. So what's next for you?
Well, for a few years now, I've harbored the thought or dream that I would want to go and do a portfolio non-exec career. And in truth, I've already done a few things towards that in the last few years. But ultimately, I'm approaching 50, so I don't know. This might be a bit of a midlife crisis. But for the next decade, I want to have more fun and learn more and help more. And so why not do that? Help more people and businesses on a broader basis. And so roughly, I'm thinking I want to do 1 day to a third pro bono stuff, which I already do a bit of, and do a bit more there. 1 day to a third of coaching, which I already do, but just not on the meter, and maybe ideally coaching senior marketers who've maybe just got the top job, exec job. And then 3 days to 2/3 of non-exec roles. It's a well-trodden path. Many people do it, but you can be on a board of a company in 20 to 25, maybe 30 days a year, and help them more in an advisory space, so on the side of the pitch rather than on the pitch. But I just think there's the potential for a really enriching and fulfilling time there. And of course, I will miss leadership of teams. I will miss the sense of belonging. I've been at Direct Line for 10 years.
Yep.
But equally, there's some things I won't miss. I think actually post-pandemic, leading big teams is a bit harder and a bit less fulfilling than it used to be. It certainly feels that way for me. So in the mix of all of that, I'm really happy to be jumping off a cliff to a sort of a pen sketch future. And I'm sure there'll be undulations, but I'm really excited about that.
Well, I think setting off with an aim to have over 50 days a year pro bono is admirable. So I think that's really, really fantastic. Really fantastic. I'm going to wrap up with final questions, if that's okay. First of which really is, what do you want to say that you haven't said already? Anything missing? Anything we've not asked that you might want to talk about in a bit more detail?
Whenever I talk about data, the one thing that comes to mind is that we shouldn't lose sight of the importance of instinct and judgment. And when the hairs are standing up on the back of your neck because you just feel something to be so, that's really, really important, and to be held in balance with a compelling data story. So I'm a big fan of building whole brain marketing teams, which have the balance of left and right brain and creativity and data, etc. And I think the best decisions are made with those two things in balance. And some of the boldest decisions I've made in my career have had either haven't had the data up front, or we've done the data part retrospectively after the decision had been made, fill in the blanks retrospectively. But I always feel a little bit worried about a data conversation that doesn't respect the other side of the brain, and holding the two in balance, of course, is the magic.
I'd say the common theme of today has been a balancing act. I love this.
I'm reflecting on that as well. Yeah. Maybe it's because I'm at this sort of balancing act time in my own life, but it was ever thus, wasn't it? I mean, if decisions were easy and binary, then life would be a doddle, wouldn't it? But not many things are binary.
Indeed. Mark, thank you so much today. I've got one last question for you, which is this podcast around individuals who've pioneered new ways to use data to deliver better customer experiences, etc. I know that Pete Marquis recommended you. I was just wondering who you might think about recommending someone you admire in the industry.
Well, if Pete hadn't recommended me, I might well have recommended him, because he's awesome in this regard. It would be Marg Joblin, actually. Marg, CMO at NatWest. She's hugely respected. I've done a few things with her in the past, and she's brilliant. She's also just been crowned Marketing Week Marketer of the Year. And then very specifically, she recruited the head of data at Direct Line into her team. It pinched him. So I'm quite keen to find out what they're up to. So there you go.
Fantastic. Thank you. Thank you so much for your time today and all your fantastic insights. Really, really appreciate it.
My pleasure.
Thanks again to Mark for joining us for this episode. I continue to be thrilled to hear so many of our guests bring the conversation back to consumers, as it can sometimes feel like the consumer gets lost or forgotten in the conversation. But as Mark puts it, ultimately the consumer is our boss, and when it comes to their personal data, in the future they may vote with their data, only sharing it with companies they trust and receive value from. All that leaves for me to do is to remind you to hit that subscribe button so you know when the next episode of Identity Architects lands. But until then, thanks for listening.